Well, the thing I wanted to say, with the Iron Tower trilogy, they did, when they published that, they did something that I don't recall having been done before, and I'm not really sure that it was done since, because they published those in sequential months.
Right. It was like September, October, November, or maybe it was August, September, and October, but something like that. 3 months, 3 books.
Right, now was that, had they talked to you, like knowing publishers, I mean, this is kind of one of those rhetorical questions. Had they talked with you about that, or explained why they chose to do it that way, or?
No.
And it just happened?
It just happened. That's just the way it is. And it also just happened that I had a horrible artist to do the covers of them. His name is Alan Lee.
Oh!
I mean, that's probably the best artist I could have possibly have gotten for those books. Alan Lee,
Yeah.
the one who did the Lord of the Rings for Peter Jackson.
Yep, yeah. Because I remember seeing those books come out in sequence, and, you know, back in those days, I hadn't, you know, other than game material, I hadn't been published, and so, you know, as with many folks who are looking toward doing that someday, you go to the bookstores and you haunt it, and you're looking at these new properties coming out, and all of a sudden, from 0 to 60, here's this Dennis McKiernan guy, and it was later that year, or a year later, it was Tucson. It was later than, wasn't it? October?
Yeah, I think it was late. It was the next. No, it was the next year.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Tucson. They were published in '84, and Tucson was '85.
Yeah. But that's why, you know, having seen Dennis around and stuff like that, that's why that Sunday morning was the, you know, there was Dennis, and you cataloged these names, you knew he had these books, and you got to know him, and that was fairly cool.
Yeah, it was.
Now, with you're a hard science guy. I mean, that's your degree is. So why fantasy?
Okay. Ever since I was a kid, I'd been in love with fairy tales, and actually, my dad, when I was like 9 years old, I was just sort of a lackadaisical reader, and he gave me a pulp magazine. It was called the Captain Future Quarterly, and it starred Captain Future. Captain Future's real name was Kurt somebody or other, and he had the fastest spaceship in the universe. It's called a comet, and he had a couple of he had 3 guys that he always ran around with. One was called a brain, because it was a brain in a box. It was not an AI, it was a human brain that had been preserved in a box of a very famous scientist, and helped him solve a lot of problems. He had a giant robot named Greg, and he had an android named Otho. And I was 9 years old, and I consumed that magazine in no time flat. Just boom, I was just absorbed in it. Sort of like Doc Savage in space, okay. And so I ran down to the bookstore to get another Captain Future. Guess what? They only come out once a month. And this was a quarterly. They only come out once a quarter with all those stories. So I got Planet Stories and Thrilling Wonder and things like that. And that launched me into reading when I was 9 years old. I mean, really avid reading. That's what launched me into it. Up until that time, I was just kind of a lackadaisical reader. And so I haunted the library from that point of view, and I discovered the fairy tale books, the blue fairy tale book, the red fairy tale book, the green fairy tale book, the white one, that whole series of fairy tales, and Oz books, and all that kind of stuff. And I was just fascinated by it, but that's what captured my imagination. But Captain Future, I think, made me an electrical engineer. And so, why fantasy? That's always been where my literary interests have lain. And as far as my work, that was Captain Future, truly, I think, probably.
Got it. So you get that very nice split there.
That's right.
Yeah.
Schizophrenic.
Well, as we all are on one level or another. So in looking at fantasy, because fantasy sells more than science fiction does, what is it that you see about fantasy that's got that larger appeal than unfortunately, say, Captain Future might today?
Well, probably because the worlds that fantasy are set in are easier to understand than any dystopic future world or any future world where a lot of things need more explanation than in fantasy. In fantasy, I don't think you need as much background to grasp the ideas there as you might need in a good hard science fiction story. Of course, that's up to the author. If the author can write anything that is graspable by the common reader, that's fine. I think it's easier to grasp fantasy than it is hard science fiction.
Right.
Now, soft science fiction, like I don't know, Star Trek or
Space
Star
fantasy,
Wars or
yeah.
space fantasy kind of stuff, space wars, space opera.
Yeah.
That's easily grasped, okay? But when you get down to philosophical or metaphysical questions, which you can explore quite easily in fantasy, I think it's harder to explore those in science fiction, and so you have to tend more toward the factual issues than the speculative issues.
More math than philosophy.
I guess that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, there are some individuals who would suggest, and I'm not really trying to ask a leading question here, but I've got my own biases, that literature and high literature is the stories are reflective of the human condition, and they suggest that speculative fiction that's not possible because we're not in this world. Do you want to speak at all to that?
I think that's bullshit.
No, don't hold back. Just say what you think. It's okay. Don't,
I do. You know, there used to be a really nice ongoing discussion having to do between science fiction writers and fantasy writers, where the science fiction writer says, well, all you got to do if you're to write fantasy, just wave your hands, and the magic occurs. And you get out of any trouble with magic. And my take on it is, if it's a well-written story, you can probably take any really well-written fantasy story and convert it to a well-written science fiction story and vice versa. I do believe that. And therefore, I also believe that you can take a well-written science fiction story or a fantasy story and turn it into a well-written mainstream story, okay? And still retain some of the elements that are there. I mean, you take Peter Strout. He's one of our honored people here this weekend. Peter Strout and Stephen King and people like that. They write nice literary stories with a lot of fantastical elements in them. Okay. Stephen King, by the way, is a wonderful writer for 2 or 3 paragraphs. And then he's got some direct. And then he's a wonderful writer again. And he's got some more direct. He's the most uneven writer I know. And I really like the stuff he does. A lot. Okay? But some people look at those in-betweens and say, he's just a hack. And they don't look at the alternate in-betweens that says, this guy's magnificent.
Yeah.
Okay. So, anyway, that's my take on literary stories, literature, versus science fiction versus fantasy. Any good, well-told story is worth reading. Okay.
So then let's come back around, sort of, what is it about Dragon Doom that you think that hits with everybody? I mean, say Dragon Doom, you watch guys in the audience twitch. Because we all remember our favorite pieces of Dragon Doom. What is it, I mean, I know for some of my books that when I was writing them, I know that I was hitting on all cylinders and I would love to get back there someday. Is that in some ways how you feel about Dragon Doom?
No, I never feel like I have to get back there. but Dragon Doom tells, I think, an eternal kind of story, the one that has to do with a bonding of people that comes out of conflict. And I do have a story to tell you about Dragon Doom that does not exactly answer this question. Is that mine? anyway, there's this woman in Michigan who wrote me a letter who said, I want to tell you what happened to me in reading Dragon Doom. She said, I was reading Dragon Doom. It was a wonderful story going along. I was totally involved in this character. There was this female lead whose name is Ellen. She says, I totally identified with Ellen. She was just a wonderful person. I really liked it. And then you killed her. He says, when I read that part, I put the book on the arm of my chair, face down at that opening. And I got up and I said, I'm never going to read this author again. And 2-3 weeks later, I would be standing at the sink looking out through my window as I'm washing dishes, and I break into tears. And I realize it's because Ellen is dead. And she said, I was just an emotional wreck for those 2 or 3 weeks. I finally went back and I picked up the book. And I read the last, I think, 5 or 6 chapters after that. And I want to thank you. And I basically, tears rolled down my face as I was reading her letter.
I know when I was reading that book, I was crying during that time.
And when I was writing it, I was crying.
Yeah, yeah. That's that's one of those things that and I think you do that exceedingly well, killing characters.
Oh yeah.
Oh, yeah. But in sort of in a serious angle on that, can you talk a little bit about the importance of being able to take that risk and killing characters? Because I think there are very few authors that dare to go there and dare to make as full a commitment to what that takes as you do.
Well, yeah, I've killed quite a few nice people. I don't know how many of you read The Iron Tower, but I killed Danner in The Iron Tower.
Oh yeah.
Horrible. Do I see some tears running down? And in The Eye of the Hunter, I killed a character named Willie. He was the lead. And Ellen was the lead in Dragon Doom. I've killed some badasses too. You know, they almost always get their comeuppance. And the reason that I do that is because that's, to me, what's supposed to happen in the book. It's a commitment to the fact that good people die in terrible circumstances. And good people die when they have done some heroic deed, doing the heroic deed. They get killed. And I think that's one of the things that many authors try to stay away from because they want their characters to live all the way through the book. But I say, well, yeah, most of my characters will live all the way through the book, the good guys. But some won't make it. And it's because that's the way life is. Some people just will not make it. But they'll go down in a hell of a good fight. And those characters went down in a hell of a good fight. So
I think it's. Do you find as a writer, as part of your process, when you're dealing with really strong emotions, because I mean that's the fact that you can talk about characters that you've killed, and all of us all of us who've read those books are feeling it still, and we conjure up those emotions. Clearly, those are really strong emotions for us as the reader, and you as the writer have to put them in. How difficult is it for you to make sure that you've communicated those emotions?